Wow, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all, and welcome to the workshop on protecting children from online sexual exploitation, including live streaming spaces, technology, policy, and prevention. My name is Sabrina Vorbau. I'm a project manager at European SchoolNet and representing here the InSafe network of European Safer Internet Centers. I will be co-moderating the session together with my colleague Danarai Thakur from the Center for Democracy and Technology. And we are also joined by our colleague Deborah Vassallo, who is the coordinator of the Safer Internet Center in Malta, and she will be supporting us with the online moderation. Welcome everyone here in the room and also online for joining our session and for your participation. The session aims of exploring how technology, policy, and education can work together to tackle the evolving threat of online child sexual exploitation and abuse, also known as CSAM or CSEA, particularly in the live streaming context, but not exclusively. We're really fortunate to be joined by an incredible group of experts from civil society, academia, and the tech industry who will share their insight from different regions and perspectives, truly in the multi-stakeholder approach of the IGF. We have structured our session that will run for 90 minutes in 3 parts, where we will tackle different angles of the subject. Before we dive into the first round, let me briefly introduce our speakers. Here in the room with us, we have next to me Robert Hoving, who is president of Off Limits, the Safer Internet Center in the Netherlands, and he's also president of the InHope board. And we have Kate Rouhani with us. She is also from the Center of Democracy and Technology. Virtually and online joining us from various parts of the world, we have Sean Litton, who is President and Chief Executive Officer at the Tech Coalition. We have Dr. Sabine K. Witting, Professor at Leiden University, Patricia Aurora, CEO of Social Media Matters, Avo Aydam Ahmea, Executive Director of Child Online Africa, and Lisa Robbins, Online Safety Policy Analyst at the OECD. So lots of expertise on our side, and I see also loads of expertise in the room. So let's begin by exploring how technology tools are currently being developed and implemented to dedicate and to prevent CSAM in live streaming spaces, but not exclusively, and how can they ensure that these tools align with children's rights and safety. So we will turn a first question to our speakers, and after each round, we will take a pause and invite you to share your intervention and your questions with us. And if you would like to do so, please just line up here in front of the microphone. So our first question, how can technologies to prevent CSAM be integrated in trust and safety systems in a way that protects and promotes children's rights? And we will start with our first speaker joining us online. I give the floor over to Lisa that we can see on the screen. Hi, Lisa, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks so much. And hopefully you can hear me well.
Wonderful, yes.
Great. So thank you so much. It's really great to be here on this really rich panel for this super important conversation. So just for a tiny little bit of context for those of you who don't know the OECD, we're a multilateral organization. We have a 38-member country membership, and we work on a consensus basis to develop research and evidence policy recommendations on lots of issues, but including on digital policy and including within that digital safety and specifically work on children in the digital environment. My first remark in response to the question is that I think it's really important to acknowledge up front that protecting children from CSEA should not just be done in a way that protects and promotes their rights. I think it's really important to acknowledge that protecting children from CSEA is protecting and promoting their rights, most obviously freedom from violence, but also acknowledging that this CSEA can infringe upon dignity rights, privacy, and a safe online space is really important for enabling children to access a large number of rights in today's reality, such as opinion, assembly, information, or education and health. So while it is really important to recognise where there are tensions between our rights in our solutions and in policy solutions, which is the angle that I come from, it's really also important to recognise that there is a direct child rights implication on a number of layers of CSEA itself. Secondly, just to break down the question of what it is that we mean by technologies, I guess in the question, are we referring to companies themselves that provide live streaming or safety technologies? And how can this be integrated, and how safety technologies could be integrated into those services to provide safeguards for children? Or are we talking about a combination of both? And so for the interest of time, I'll tackle the question really from the perspective of both. And I'm going to highlight the importance of taking a safety by design approach. And I know that that's not a technology in itself, but there are technologies that underline safety by design. Here at the OECD, we've done a little bit of work here to really understand what this concept means. And we last year published a report that posits 8 key components for digital safety by design. These roughly fall into 3 buckets. I'm not going to talk about one of them, which is more about corporate social responsibility and an environment of safety. But 2 of the buckets, one of which is putting in technologies and tools at the front end to prevent harm from occurring, and then putting in tools and technologies at the back end to detect harm should it occur. Otherwise, really does require incorporating certain technologies into service design and delivery. So we also have done some research here which can shed some light on how companies are actually doing in this space and what is actually occurring in relation to the incorporation of technologies into companies to meet those sort of 2 aspects of what at the front end and also as a safety net. Firstly, we've done a series of reports looking at company practices for transparency reporting, and there are other public-facing policies and governing documents relevant to child sexual exploitation and abuse. Now, we look at a wide number of things, such as how CSEA is defined on a platform, how they enforce their policies, moderation practices, and transparency reporting practices. But one of the things we do look at is how they detect CSEA. Now, we've done 2 reports relevant to this. One report was published in 2023, and another one will be published this coming Monday. And on the one that's to be coming on Monday, it shows that companies really rarely provide detailed or clear information on their moderation practices. And now we don't specifically break this down in the report. I did a quick scan of the some 80 services we looked at relevant to live streaming. And now only 2 of those, taking aside those services whose sole business is live streaming, only 2 of those provide information on their moderation practices specific to live streaming. And again, only a few provide metrics that break down their live streaming incidences. And so really for policymakers to be able to react and understand where targeted policy action or deployment of safeguarding technology is needed, better and more granular transparency and information is really key. Now, I realise I'm about to run out of time, but we've also done a similar exercise relevant to age-related policies. This paper is out today. And just to say really briefly, it's clear from the research we've done that age assurance, and I know this is a hot topic on a lot of people's mind, but we're not quite there yet in achieving age assurance. We identify this as a key component of safety by design because companies need to know who their users are to put in place child protective safeguards. But of the 50 services we looked at here, only 2 systematically assure age on account creation. And so there still is gaps to be done in relation to age assurance. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for kicking us off and sharing already with us the incredible work the OECD is doing at global level, mentioning a lot of publications, and we will also make sure to include this in our session report. And you mentioned very interesting areas already that we will definitely come back to safety by design and age assurance, really crucial topics that are on debate right now. But what also struck out for me that you said that protection means already promoting children's rights, and I think that's a very good kickoff for this first round. We will now turn to Avo, who is from Child Online Africa, also a very big advocate on children's rights, and we will hear a little bit more from Avo what is happening in the space, particularly in the Africa region. I hope, Avo, you can hear us, and the floor would be yours.
Yes, I can hear you.
Good morning.
Hello, everyone. Pleasure connecting with you from Accra, Ghana. I'm going to build on what the background Lisa gave, because we don't want to burn time. We want to build on what each other is presenting. So as much as possible, as you are all aware, Africa has a unique situation where we have an even situation of digital literacy, and the rapid growth of technology is helping to some extent, but is also exposing a number of incidences. And at Child Online Africa, our focus is to give children what they want, what they need in order to be online. So by so doing, we interact with these young people a lot to get things done. And one of the things they make us understand is that virtually almost every day, there's something that they encounter in the space. So we were asking, okay, so what can be done in order to safeguard your interest and your engagement in the space? And they made us understand that it's important that now that AI is there, the platform is made in such a way that it's sensitive to detect, prevent, and also report streaming of live situations that affect children by extension. And the moment they mention AI, you ask them, okay, so what can you do yourself? So, okay, we can try to code something, but we haven't gotten there yet. But then we are of the view that as an organization, a growing environment where young people are largely involved in the space, it will be important for us to look at protocols that allow laws to be enforced effectively, because one of the things they came up with is the fact that the laws are not biting, and it looks like they are not working effectively as far as our country, our region is concerned. So they're looking at the involvement of children in local communities to design solutions which affect them, so that it will be foolproof. It wouldn't be like adults sitting to come up with designs that do not really impact on children. And they also recommended that there should be human oversight on AI moderation to prevent false positives, if possible. And again, there's also the need, they said we should put a lot of responsibility on internet service providers, because they should be able to block some of the live streams of children, but they are not doing that enough. And all because there are no laws holding them accountable. So they will feel that if the service providers could be made a lot more responsible, the system will be good enough and conducive enough for them. But their involvement is very key in ensuring that the design for the protection solution is fit for purpose and is intuitive for them to interact with. So by extension, they felt that it's important for platforms to be faster in identifying incidences of abuse and rescuing young people if they should fall victims, prosecution of perpetrators, and also by having at the back of the mind of designers that children are using the platform. Even though they don't give money, they don't buy anything, they are also consumers, and their interests should be taken on board and taken seriously. That's what I can say for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avo, and also for highlighting already youth participation in the whole process. So really making young people part of the development process, but also policy making, the design as well, and definitely call for action for more responsibilities for the platforms. Thank you for now. We will now go to our next speaker, Patricia Aurora. We talked about platforms already. Patricia works for Social Media Matters, specifically in the India region. I hope, Patricia, you can hear us, and the floor would be yours now. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm so happy to be here joining virtually. Giving the context of our child safety work in India and what we have been doing and how India is basically shaping the laws around child protection in India. Given that, just a brief introduction about who I am for the audience over there. So I'm Pratishtha Arora. I'm currently leading Social and Media Matters, an organization that's working at the intersection of digital safety, child rights, and online harm prevention in India. Basically, I've been engaged in shaping conversations around child protection, digital literacy, and trust and safety frameworks. And hearing Lisa and Avo so far in setting the context, I think so. Now, this adds value when we talk about the ongoing initiatives that we have been doing in India for over a decade now. And this has given us a clear standing that, what we need as children and their voices to be heard by many, right? Right now in India, what we come across is that many children who are facing any form of abuse or harm, they do not feel or they do not know the path of how to kind of report the situations, even if it is a form of online harm like cyberbullying. This is one area which is talked about across India. Cyberbullying amongst minors is a major issue in India. And when we're talking about technology and when we're talking about policies, I think so tech platforms have a major role over here. Why? Because when we are giving that liberty to children to access internet, which is somewhere a right for them as well in the digital spaces when we're talking about digital rights in India. But sadly, the tech companies, what we are seeing is that they're failing in a form that we do not have some standard mechanisms to protect children. And these standard mechanisms are not well defined because we do not have a robust legal framework. We are borrowing some sections from various laws currently to protect children online, which was not even into speculation until we realized that how children are being targeted in the online spaces. From bullying to grooming, it has taken lives of many young children as well because of these harms in the online spaces. Now coming to live streaming, because live streaming is one platform where pre-recorded videos are being monetized for their own benefits. And this is coming from cross-platform as well. The usage of child abusive content is something which is at its peak right now. And quoting some stats from the reports that has been released by NECMEC and also the Tipline report that stated that 9 million children out of 36.2 million population of India have been targeted of these. So this gives a very big number for us to even think about what is happening, especially when we talk about the cultural aspect of it. How we are looking into this content from the live streaming perspective as well, that how we are able to add a lens of safety for them in the online spaces. Are we giving them adequate mechanisms that they can freely access internet, or that freedom is turning into a bad shape for them? So these are some points that I want to think about, and also think about that. Do we need to redefine these policies? Do we need to rethink about them? Do we need to reimagine that what is happening? So do we need to reframework it? Do we need to have more collaborative efforts where civil society organizations, where tech companies, where regulatories can come together and create a whole package where we are just thinking about minor safety over there. At this point, at this juncture, when we are talking about the legal frameworks, I think so many of you must have also heard about the Digital Personal Data Protection Act that is talking very specific about child safety in India. There was parallel legal framework called the Digital India Act, which was only to take forward the Information Technology Act, where India is trying to define all sorts of online harms, protecting digital users. So these two important acts, we are also hopeful that that will reshape the whole cultural context of child safety in India, including live streaming spaces that will prevent children from CSAT and situations that children are encountering in the online spaces at the given time.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for your intervention and also bringing us closer a bit to the national context and the current situation in India, and also the very shocking numbers you have shared with us. But I think, and we will come back to this also in our second round, where we will talk a bit more about cross-platform and multi-stakeholder collaboration, but reporting is of course crucial to make that more accessible to children and young people, but the public in general, build more awareness, but also more confidence in young people to take the step to reporting. Before we come to our last speaker for this first round, I just remind everyone, if you would like to make an intervention or ask a question here in the room, please line up towards the microphone, and also online there is the possibility to intervene. You can just raise your hand. We will now conclude this first round, giving the floor to Sean Litton, President from the Tech Coalition. Sean, I hope you're with us, and the floor is yours now.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be with you all. By way of introduction, the Tech Coalition is a global association of leading tech companies. We have social media, search engines, we have many live streaming platforms, some that's their primary business, and then many platforms, it's a component of their service. They'll have a live streaming component. And we are 100% focused on preventing, disrupting child sexual exploitation and abuse, and building our members' capacity to do this. As we heard from the other speakers, there's alarming trends with respect to online child sexual exploitation and abuse in a live streaming context. It's used to also, it is perhaps the #1 way that children are now exploited commercially in terms of, we would call it sex trafficking. These trends underscore the need to develop and deploy technologies that prevent child sexual exploitation and abuse online on live streaming platforms, while also ensuring children's safety, well-being, and privacy. The Tech Coalition and our members are prioritizing ways to do this. 2 examples I'd like to talk about today. First of all, we are working with one of our members, it's a major live streaming platform, to develop a tool to detect child sexual exploitation and abuse in a live streaming context. It uses session metadata and third-party signals to generate a risk score for the particular broadcast. And because this tool operates without analyzing actual content of the live stream, privacy standards are preserved. But based on that score, the child safety team can take a closer look and decide whether to shut down or intervene in some way in that broadcast. So in practice, this approach relies on participant characteristics like country of origin, the use of anonymization services, etc. And by combining these metadata signals, the system indicates the likelihood of child sexual exploitation and abuse activity occurring within a given live stream session for further investigation. Now, development of this tool began in the fall of 2024. In the summer, our members will test and formally evaluate its feasibility for this approach for broader industry adoption. So our goal is to advance detection methods that use behavioral signals and metadata rather than relying solely on content scanning and preserve privacy of the conversation. So another example is Apple's communication safety feature. For example, Apple's a member of the Tech Coalition. This uses on-device machine learning to detect nudity in photos and video accounts. And because analysis happens on the device, neither Apple or any other third party observes the content or is aware that nudity was shared. When nudity is detected, the image is blurred and the child sees age-appropriate safety information and help resources. And recently, Apple announced the expansion of this feature to FaceTime calls. It is also available by API for free to all developers who develop apps for iOS. This enables any app to check for nudity in a video stream, detecting the sensitive content either from the device's camera or the remote devices signed into the conference call. These are just two examples of how child sexual exploitation and abuse detection can combine both children's safety and privacy to reduce abuse in live streaming environments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sean. Also, again, for giving us the perspective and the work that is going on in the space of tech companies, certainly a lot. We will come back to Sean also in the next round, where we then also talk a little bit more about multi-stakeholder collaboration, and also Sean mentioned already the promotion of well-being for children and young people when using technology. Before we get there, I see we have a few people lining up. Just please, before you intervene or ask your question, quickly introduce yourself. Please go ahead.
Hello, good morning. I'm Julien Rossi. I'm an associate professor at the University of Paris State, and I'm co-chair of the working group on internet governance. And I've taken part in a few research projects on online youth safety. One of the things that come up very frequently when we do focus groups in middle and high schools with young people is that a lot of the time they feel that partly they can be compelled by adults and institutions to use digital tools. Of course, I'm not talking about live streaming, but just having to use a mobile phone and being online a lot, even when sometimes they might wish to disconnect. And when they are faced with this kind of content or with cyberbullying problems or any of the things that you have talked about, the main problem that comes up is, where do I find a safe space where adults can hear my problems and act on them? And I feel like a lot of the proposals coming from the tech company side is to say, well, we're going to develop a technology that is going to detect nudity and things like that without infringing on privacy, which is something that I would like maybe to question sometimes. But actually, what happens then? If some content is flagged or if something really bad happens, what happens if then police, for example, doesn't act upon it? And so my question to you is, in your work advocating for children's rights in the online sphere, how much effort are you targeting towards law enforcement agencies and educational institutions so that when something happens, they act upon it? Because you can flag content as much as you like. Platforms can act as much as they'd like. If at some point there is no law enforcement coming up, problems are not going to be solved. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. We haven't heard from Robert yet, but maybe this could already be a question for you to briefly answer, but I know that you later on will give a bit more context on the work that Off Limits are doing. But
yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for that question. I would like to bring in the perspective of the Safer Internet Centers, the system we have in Europe, because that actually is more a safe space, both for parents, caretakers, but also for people who are a victim, to find help. And a lot of times that help can be that they just have someone that listens to them. They can also take the content down, and then if they want to take more action, for instance, go to the police, they can help with that as well, but they can also provide them towards the right helping parties. So for me, it would be really crucial to strengthen such a network, because there are these spaces where people can go. And a third aspect of them is the awareness raising, to ensure, to help schools and to give schools material to ensure that it doesn't happen. You will always have people with bad intent, so you cannot stop everything. But I think you could step up much more in the prevention, looking at the data that is actually coming in at the safer internet centers.
Mm-hmm. And I think we will hear a little bit more about this later on in the session. Maybe for this round, one more question or intervention. And Jutta, please.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Sabrina. I'm Jutta Kroll from the Dynamic Coalition on Children's Rights in the Digital Environment. And since age assurance was already mentioned as a tool to protect children from online sexual exploitation, I just wanted to intervene and to turn your attention to the Global Age Assurance Summit, Standards Summit communique on age assurance, which is a child rights-based approach to such tools, making sure not only that children get an age-appropriate space on the internet, but also it's possible with age assurance instruments to make sure that adults cannot join these spaces that are made for children. And the Global Age Assurance Standards Summit came to the conclusion that this can be done data minimizing and privacy preserving without being intrusive and gathering data from children as well as from adults. And this is all based on the ISO standard 27566. So if anybody is interested how that can be done, you will find the communique. We have brought some copies, and just come to the Dynamic Coalition's booth in the IGF Village and we can talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jutta, also for mentioning already the great work you and colleagues are doing on children's rights. I think we will move to the next round, but please stay with us. We will bring you in for intervention later. I will hand over now to Danarai to guide us through the second round, more looking into cross-platform and multi-stakeholder collaborations.
Yes, thank you so much, Sabrina. Hi, everyone. I'm Dhanaraj Thakur, Research Director at the Center for Democracy and Technology, based in Washington, D.C. So one aspect of the problem that was already raised is this issue of cross-platform prevalence of content related to child sexual exploitation and abuse. This is a significant problem and part of the reality of how this kind of exploitation and abuse occurs. The question that we want to raise, to start with our experts, and then we can move into a Q&A at the end of the round as well, is how can we promote, or better promote cross-platform efforts, including on live stream platforms, to prevent the spread of this kind of child sexual exploitation and abuse content. And to do that, I'm going to start with you, Robert, to hear your thoughts first on this issue, on this cross-platform problem.
All right, thank you very much. We're from the Safer Internet Center here in the Netherlands, Off Limits. We have the hotline for the child abuse material to be reported. We have the helpline for the other transgressive behavior, and also where caretakers can call for help. And we also have an initiative which is called Stop It Now, which is a prevention line for people actually watching this material. And when I bring that perspective in, when I start, for an instance, with the perpetrator, we did research and we discovered that the people calling Stop It Now, more than half are males under 26, and they watch this type of behavior out of escalation behavior. For instance, because at a too young age they went online, and we know how easy it is to get access to an adult website, and we also know that looking at heavy material at a young age desensitizes and can ensure that people want to look for heavy material. Abuse material might be heavy material. When we look at the victims, for instance, at the numbers of the hotline at Off Limits, of all the reports coming in, 1/3 of those reports is self-generated, meaning young children making sexualized images themselves, might be alone, might be with other children, might be with attributes, but they make them themselves through webcams, phones, etc. And of those 1/3 of reports, 75% is prepubescent, so implying very young children. This is not children going to middle school, in their teenagers, this is really young children. And then we look at platforms, that there are different types of platforms. There might be live streaming platforms or also social media. There are a lot of good aspects about social media, and some social media are really veered towards sharing content, but there's also social media that is designed to meet people and to connect with people. Now, when we go back to that 75% pubescent, we know from, and we're going to investigate this now together with the Ministry of Justice, but we know that it might be grooming, for instance, in online spaces, but it might also be risk behavior looking for attention because it comes from previous abuse, or it's because it's stuff they have seen online at a too young age and they're enacting that. Now, when you have these three ingredients, Ms. Cole already mentioned age verification. I think it's very important to, at certain online spaces, have age verification to ensure that old people who want to pose as younger people and young people who want to pose as older people, that they cannot connect. And also to chime in and to actually echo what Janice said at the session about deepfakes. Cross-platform efforts, connecting with education. I think we could also really have companies stepping up to collaborate more with schools, to give material instead of just pushing their tools towards schools, but also help build up the curriculum, because we always say education, but when you put everything at schools, then there should also be the capacity at schools to be able to do that. And I think combining it with the tech sector, for instance, like Janice mentioned, could actually be a very good idea. So that would be my reaction to your question.
Great, thank you. Thank you for those points. Particularly the statistics you mentioned around prepubescent self-generated content. So Sean, I want to turn to you now, because given your particular perspective, with the coalition and therefore the opportunity to work across actual platforms and engage in efforts across platforms, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this issue of solutions, cross-platform solutions.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So as the other speakers have noted, bad actors typically exploit multiple services across the tech ecosystem in their attempts to groom children, distribute CSAM, or engage in other harmful activities like financial sextortion. So, for example, the bad actor might, contact a child on a gaming platform, move them to a private messaging platform, and then perhaps use a live streaming platform down the road. So the abuse spans social media, gaming, live streaming, payment apps, and more. But the individual company may be is obviously unaware of what happened on the other platforms. They don't have all the information, and it makes them difficult without the complete picture to adequately grasp what's going on and take action. So that's why industry collaboration is essential. At the Tech Coalition, we recently launched a program called Lantern, which is the first cross-platform signal sharing program that helps companies strengthen enforcement of their child safety policies. We launched Lantern so companies could securely share signals with one another about accounts and activity that violate their own child sexual exploitation and abuse policies. Until Lantern, there was no consistent way for companies to share this information in a secure and privacy-preserving way. Lantern helps fill that gap by revealing a fuller picture of the harm. Working with Lantern, companies can increase their prevention and detection capabilities, speed up threat identification, build awareness of emerging threats, bad actor tactics, and strengthen their reporting out to hotlines and other authorities. So we know this approach works. In last year, members shared hundreds of thousands of signals through Lantern. This led to account actions, content removal, and the disruption of offender networks and CSAM circulation. Signals helped flag contact and trafficking cases as well that may not have been identified otherwise. It's really important. And crucially, these outcomes come in addition to the original action taken by the company that first detected the abuse, showing how Lantern enables a ripple effect of protection across the ecosystem. So together, initiatives like Lantern are helping close detection gaps, enabling faster action, and improving that collaboration really does make a difference. It's not just possible, it's powerful. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Sean. Very interesting to hear about Project Lantern, and I'm sure that might come up again in the Q&A. Very good. So also next, I want to now turn to one of our online speakers, Sabine Witten, based at Leiden University. Sabine, since this is, and hopefully you can hear us, and as well, since you're joining us now and speaking for the first time, please, if you want to say more about yourself, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I hope you can hear me all right. So my name is Sabine Witting. I'm an assistant professor for law and digital technologies at Leiden University, but I'm also the co-founder of Tech Legality, which is a consultancy firm specializing in human rights and tech, especially on a lot of these hot potato topics that already came up today, such as age assurance. We do a lot of work on these topics across the world. So thanks so much for the question around cross-platform collaboration, and I think this kind of collaboration is essential because platforms all deal with the same human rights and children's rights issues, especially issues around competing rights. And a lot of this really is essentially trying to square the circle, and this kind of collaboration can certainly assist with that. I think also that cross-platform collaboration alone, of course, is not enough. As important as it is that industry have their own space, for example, for the tech coalition to really collaborate, I think a multi-stakeholder effort is always crucial to have all people affected by technologies at the table, human rights advocates, child rights advocates, academia, but also parents and children themselves. And I also want to use an example of one of the technologies that's often put forward as a solution to child sexual abuse in the digital space, but also especially for live streaming, which is age assurance, which has already come up a few times. And I think when we approach age assurance, for example, from a multi-stakeholder collaboration, one of the key gaps that's also always criticized about age assurance is the lack of clear evaluation criteria and how we can assess, for example, the effectiveness and the robustness of these technologies, and also to really understand better who is adversely impacted by these technologies. And at the moment, there are some standards. There's some industry standards which have played a very important role for quite a long time. But the problem is that a lot of the industry standards are not accessible, and they're not drafted in a multi-stakeholder way. They're drafted by industry, they're often drafted by age assurance providers themselves. And that, of course, then begs the question of, might these standards be biased to a certain extent? Have human rights concerns from across the world really been taken into consideration? And here I'm not only talking about the global north, but especially the global south. And representatives of the global south are usually underrepresented in these industry standard making processes, which is a huge problem because of the important role that industry standards are playing here. And maybe I want to point at a good practice example that I'm lucky enough to be part of, which is the current drafting of the IEEE standard on the prevention of CSEA in generative AI. And this group is really a combination of all the actors that we need around the table. We have human rights advocates, we have industry, we have tech experts, we have academia. And it's really enriching to see how an industry standard can be developed with all of these different stakeholders at the table. And also we have a strong representation from the global south. And of course, also generative AI, we heard it from Abel and from Pratisha, is a different story in India and in African countries than it is in the global north. So it's really important to have not only a cross-platform collaboration, but multi-stakeholder and regional representation, especially of vulnerable groups. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sabine. And thank you for raising this point about the relevance of standard settings, particularly around age insurance tech, and the utility of having multi-stakeholder approaches with that. So I now want to turn to Kate Rowan, my colleague at the Center for Democracy and Technology. So Kate, we heard about from Sean about the industry efforts around cross-collaboration, but we also heard both from Robert and Sabine the importance of multi-stakeholderism in these efforts. I'm curious on your thoughts on how we can better address the cross-platform proliferation of these kinds of content.
Thanks so much, Dhanaraj, and thanks to everybody who has spoken so far. I echo a lot of what's already been said, and I specifically want to pick up on the point that cross-platform efforts need multi-stakeholder engagement in order to work best, in part because cross-platform efforts are going to create even more significant risks for human rights like free expression and privacy. And that is actually a necessary thing. Child sexual abuse and exploitation is such a large and clear harm. It is a crime around the world for a reason, and that means that efforts to restrict it are necessarily proportionate to the harm. And so therefore, like when mistakes get made, we can see really significant impacts on the lives of innocent people. And in order to ensure that our responses to the crime of CSEA is proportionate, multi-stakeholder engagement can ensure that harms do not propound beyond the criminal activity. And multi-stakeholder engagement can be really helpful for ensuring that there are things like transparency in appeals processes. The Tech Coalition, for example, has done human rights impact assessments on its efforts to combat CSEA. That's really positive, and it would be really helpful to have more spaces in which children themselves, survivors, civil society, technologists, especially privacy experts, and others can engage in the ways that platforms are developing their information sharing efforts to ensure that human rights are respected throughout their development and their execution. And I specifically want to call out a couple of things. So the Tech Coalition has talked about its development of a tool to detect signals across platforms for child sexual abuse and exploitation. This is a really interesting and valuable tool, I think, and it would be helpful, particularly to have transparency into the tools themselves, not just for signals development, but also for things like content detection, especially in live streaming where it's particularly difficult to execute. Most content detection tools are designed to identify content at rest, whereas live streaming content is constantly in motion. And so the various tools that exist to try to identify child sexual abuse and exploitation within live streaming are currently significantly lacking in benchmarks. Yet we have a number of organizations that are marketing technologies that claim to be able to identify child sexual exploitation and abuse content in live streaming or in video content. But we don't really have a good way to identify whether these products actually work or work sufficiently, or whether there are sufficient safeguards in order to address potential errors in the content detection tools. Multi-stakeholder engagement and transparency can help with both of those things. It can help us identify and improve these types of tools, and it can help us sort of understand how they work going forward and help us deploy better transparency and accountability tools for tech companies themselves and for governments who are engaged in proper enforcement of their laws going forward. So those are a couple things that I thought about. And I also wanted to turn back to Robert's point about media literacy and ensuring that we are investing in people's understanding regarding how to engage in combating CSEA at the local and like person to person and user level. I think we definitely need significantly more engagement in that front, and we also need tech companies, both in a cross-platform and a transparency way, to talk to each other about how their reporting processes work. One of the things that we see is that your enforcement efforts sometimes are only as good as your reporting processes are. If it is difficult to find the button, just the simple design feature of how to report and how to report harm and ensure that it is moving forward, that is another simple thing that platforms can share information about and can share transparency reporting about to make sure that we are consistently getting better in how we combat these harms while also ensuring that we are protecting free expression and privacy in the process.
Great, thank you, Kate. Thank you for raising those points, particularly on multi-stakeholder approaches. That as you put it, can be directly linked to improving transparency and accountability on how platforms address this content as well. Okay, very good. So we're going to continue the pattern, the format that Sabrina laid out, where we can now have a break for questions and interventions from the audience. And again, I'd ask for the same thing, where people can line up by the mic. So please line up, and we'll take as many as we can. We do have a few minutes. So yes, sir, please start, and if you can just say introduction as well before you share your question or intervention.
Surely. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Campling. I run a tech and public policy consultancy, and I'm also a trustee of the Internet Watch Foundation. Since we're talking about sort of CSAM, no one's actually given a number. I think we need to have a number. It's estimated there's roughly 300 million victims of child sexual abuse and exploitation every year globally. That's about 14% of the world's children each year. So just to put some scale on this is a non-trivial problem. To add to the list that Lisa started with back at the start, a couple of people have mentioned age estimation and verification. I just wanted to reiterate that because it's a few sessions earlier in the week, people have asserted that's simply a mechanism to let social media platforms get even more data about their users. But as has rightly been said, there are privacy-preserving mechanisms to do age verification and estimation, which are important tools to keep children off from adult content, but importantly also adults off of child sites and from accessing child accounts on sites. So we need to make better use of that. What hasn't really been said is that research shows us that end-to-end messaging platform, encrypted messaging platforms are widely used to share child sexual abuse material once it's been captured, including video, and privacy is used as an excuse to not stop that, where people have weaponized privacy. I'd love to hear the panel's comments. There are well-known privacy-preserving techniques to block known CSAM from being shared on these platforms. Love to hear your views why they're not being used. And then finally, just wanted to also mention, since tech standards were covered, I think, by Sabrina, that they are changing. To the extent that a lot of existing parental controls and content filtering will stop working because metadata is increasingly being encrypted. That's a major problem, not least of which because a lot of the policy community don't take part in the way that tech standards are defined. So we need to find a better way for getting multi-stakeholder engagement. Otherwise, we see the problem getting bigger. Not smaller in the community. And then finally, Kate talked about those tools not being known whether they work or not. The IWF has data, we can test tools, so maybe let's get together perhaps with Sean's members afterwards and we can do some validation whether they actually are effective or not. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the offer as well at the end. Maybe we can have some quick reactions to this. The first was the point about encryption. I don't know, Kate, if you had any quick thoughts on that, and then the point about tech standards as well. Maybe Lisa or Sabine, you might want to jump in there. So, Kate, you want to?
Sure, I would love to start with the end-to-end encryption question. So, I think that oftentimes privacy and safety are placed in tension with each other. And I find that framing to be a little bit difficult because I think privacy and safety are very much in line with one another. Folks often point to the distribution of child sexual abuse material through end-to-end encrypted platforms as a reason to create an encryption backdoor or a justification for no longer using or relying on encrypted technologies. I think that can obscure many of the benefits of encrypted technologies. Encrypted technologies are particularly salient for human rights defenders, for journalists, and for people who just want to keep their data private to both themselves and to the intended recipients, and keep it outside of the view not just of governments and other bad actors, but also tech companies themselves. As tech companies continue to hoover up so much more data about all of us, encrypted services are one of the few and potentially actually only place where they cannot see the content of the communication, and that becomes more and more important as we see the world changing in front of our eyes. But I want to point to particular research that has been done by Rihanna Pfefferkorn at Stanford, where she looked at the effectiveness of content-oblivious versus content-aware methods of content moderation. And what she found is, for the most part, for the vast majority of harmful content, content-oblivious methods of detecting these types of abuse are far more effective than content scanning or content-aware methods of detecting content. And so, when you put that in front of the fact that CSAM is a very particular type of harm that is specifically probably best detected via things like content matching, putting it up against the value, putting the ability to detect it on every single surface across the entire internet against the value of having a safe and effective place to engage in communications for national security purposes, for the purposes of journalism, for the purposes of ensuring privacy from tech companies and from governments that would otherwise harm people for so many other reasons. I think that there are many other ways to detect CSAM on encrypted services, including through user reporting, which has been a very effective way to address that content, that we should continue to have encrypted services and continue to think about privacy and safety as things that are complementary to one another and not necessarily at odds.
All right, good, thank you. Okay, for purposes of time and interest of time, I'm going to ask the next two people in the line to maybe just very briefly offer your intervention or question, and then I'll bring it back to the panel, and then we move to the next round. So please go ahead. And also just a reminder to introduce yourself.
Sure, Sheila Bisesa, Trinidad and Tobago. Speaking from the experience of knowing a victim of financial sextortion who ultimately took his life, and what we've had to go through in the follow-up to that, in investigating, reporting. Coming from a developed nation, I see a big gap between some of the things I'm hearing about on stages here and the reality that exists in the developing world. Definitely reporting needs to be improved, investigative methods need to be improved. If there's the ability for victims to directly report to platforms, that would be good, because we have material that we can put forward to the platforms, and we need some outlet to give it to the authorities, or competent authorities to deal with the matter. I think the first speaker, contributor, he talked about the law enforcement ability to do things, and I think that is something that needs to be developed further. Assistance with respect to development capacity in law enforcement in developing states, as well as general awareness within the general population on some of the online harms that exist out there. That needs developing in the developing world. Sean brought up the issue of financial sextortion. He also brought up the issue of there's an exit point. There's the payments aspect to it. Direct question to Sean would be, does the Lanterns project also contemplate signals from the financial transactions aspect? Are you matching or are you searching within financial transactions to either find perpetrator payments to perpetrators, or payments from victims? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you also for sharing your experiences. The next, yes, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Thiago Tavares. I'm from SafeNet Brazil, which is the Safe Internet Center for Brazil. And I come from a country with almost 200 million internet users. 1/3, 1 in 3, are children and teenagers below 18 years old. And also live streaming has also become prevalent in Brazil. And we are seeing a growing number of reports, not only in my country, but everywhere. If you look to the US, you can see the NICMAC numbers. If you look globally, you can see, you have the INHOPE numbers. So the numbers of reports, the number of cases is growing everywhere in the world. On the other hand, the resources is declining. And my question is how to solve this dilemma? Because we need resources to create technology. We need resources to develop policies and prevention programs. But when you look for the governmental resources, they are declining. Private resources, industry resources, they are also, if it's not declining, is stable on a very low level. And the problem is growing everywhere. How to solve this dilemma? Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we'll have some quick reactions from our speakers before moving to the next round. So Sean, there was a question directed to you. Maybe you have some thoughts you can briefly share with us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there is a financial component to a lot of crimes against children online. With respect to Lantern specifically, we are piloting with 2 major global payment providers, sharing signals on Lantern to determine the effectiveness of those signals. They are only ingesting, at this point, signals from the social media, gaming, et cetera, companies. And we'll have a report out later this summer on the effectiveness of that pilot. If it's effective, then we'll scale it up and bring other financial companies onto the platform. So you're right, and I'm very sorry for what happened to your friend, and there have been a number of cases of suicides related to financial sextortion. It is a really difficult issue, and law enforcement is a big challenge there because the perpetrators of the abuse tend to thrive in countries where there's lower law enforcement capacity, and then the victims may be in a different country. And so even if the report gets to that country where the origin of the crime or the abuse, law enforcement may not necessarily have the sufficient capacity to act on the report. And so this leaves everyone in a bind. But anyway, we are piloting with financial companies, and we hope to share those results later this summer. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we do have another round of questions. So I want to actually, I know we got a lot of important feedback from the audience questions, but I do have to turn it back to you, Sabrina, so we can have another round, and then maybe we can save some time for the Q&A later on as well.
Definitely. Please stay in line. We will bring you in towards the end of the session, but in our final round, we want to turn the attention to policy. It was brought up a couple of times already, the need for more standard mechanisms and also the more stronger role of law enforcement as CSAM threats evolve, also including the rise of self-generated content. We heard global numbers and regional numbers, and we will now look more into how should national and international policy frameworks respond. So for our final round, the question to the speakers is, how can national and international policy be strengthened to address emerging forms of abuse, such as the self-generated content? And Lisa is already on screen, so we'll start this final round with you.
Thanks so much, Sabrina, and I do, of course, have some thoughts in relation to the question. I just wanted to mention quickly 2 things relevant to the discussion we just had. Firstly, not my part of the OECD, but there has been some research done by part of the OECD called Financial Action Task Force, which has done some specific research in relation to disrupting financial flows relevant to live streamed sexual abuse and sexual extortion. And so I'll share that report with Sabrina so it can be shared with the group as well. And the paper that I just mentioned in relation to CSEA, we developed an intensive list of services looking that facilitates CSEA, and that really reflected what was said about cross-platforming and off-platforming from larger services to smaller services, and a need for some scrutiny on the smaller services as well, which I think takes me into the policy question. So I just wanted to mention those issues. I think when we talk about national and international policies and how to strengthen them, certainly the position from the OECD and what we advocate is to take a tech-neutral approach, a multi-layered approach, which can range from awareness raising with children, digital literacy, through to industry action, and then stronger sticks such as industry regulation and law enforcement. That approach is a multi-stakeholder, and that we engage really in good international collaboration, so we don't end up with a really fragmented regulatory space in this really global area. But I think what might be useful in relation to this conversation is to have a think about what some sort of specific policy actions that maybe aren't getting scrutiny the same way that a broader overarching policy actions are. A couple that have really been already touched on and really are getting attention are transparency reporting of practices and platforms in a number of areas. We've talked about transparency, not just of what's happening on platform, but actually how companies are using tools, and we've talked a lot about age assurance. I think there's two other areas that would be interesting to focus on from a targeted policy response when we're looking at safety of children from CSEA in a number of areas, so not just in self-generated content, online coercion, but in all the different manifestations that we have relevant to CSEA. And I'm really pleased that the two that I was concerned about and wanted to raise have already been an important part of the discussion today. So the first is recidivism on platforms, and I think has been noted already is that law enforcement is overwhelmed, and I again, as with my colleagues on the panel, express my sincere, apologies and empathy with the gentleman who mentioned the terrible tragedy of his friend. Recidivism on platforms, I'm not necessarily talking about a law enforcement recidivism, but where bad actors are banned from an account, but then are able to recreate an account without consequences or without scrutiny. Now, Sean has already mentioned the Lantern Project, and I obviously will let him speak to that. But we do know that there is problems with recidivism. Research from Australia's eSafety Commissioner under its transparency reporting program shows that companies have really very little safeguards in the way of recidivism and varied practices. There's limited information sharing across services. And what eSafety looked at both CSEA and TVEC material and found that users and bad actors users were able to open an account, have it shut down for a violation, and easily be able to open other ones with really little oversight as to how that is managed, and oversight across platforms and within platforms to stop new accounts being created. And that is one area that could be focused on. The second is complaint mechanisms, and I'm really happy that that's been mentioned a lot today as well. And just to focus on children themselves and the capacity for children to make complaints. I think Kate mentioned this, and also Ira mentioned this already today, about really listening to kids and understanding complaints from a kid's perspective. Again and again, research on children, when we talk to kids about what they want from platforms, they want better complaint mechanisms. They want to be able to understand what it means actually to file a complaint, what filing a report means, what's the consequences, and they want responses back to them to understand what actually happened with their complaint. And so I'm happy to mention on other things, and also to mention the work that the OECD has done on transparency reporting and age assurance and more broad legislation and international cooperation. But I would posit those two as two important areas where policy action could be focused.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And you mentioned the multi-layered approach, which I think comes out very strongly of the discussion we're having today, and then also really crucial, the strong collaboration that is needed with law enforcement. And I want to bring in Robert T, also based on the work that Off Limits is doing, and specifically the hotlines.
Yeah, when I look at policies, for instance, I think a lot is there. In the Netherlands, a lot is there. On the European level, for instance, with the DSA now coming into effect, a lot is there. We have enforcement, we have safer internet centers. So we have policies how to deal with them. Sometimes I think that authorities could maybe go a bit quicker when a party is not working. For instance, Telegram, we had troubles with them in the Netherlands. You could also decide take them out of the App Store because we know there's a lot of CSAM, there's weapons being sold, etc. And I think that is a very good solution to directly go after these companies instead, for instance, looking at privacy rights, so to say. Going to the back a bit for me, the buzzwords of the IGF, and this is my first IGF, so maybe there are more buzzwords that I didn't hear, but I heard a lot like multi-stakeholder approach, public-private cooperation, but I think that is what we need more. I think also how we're sitting in this room, what we're doing at the IGF, it's like gold. You need to brush it and it starts to shine. Because the dominant theme with online abuse and with new forms of online abuse is it's content. So that to me means you should have an integral approach of how you deal with content online. Because another theme which will be dominant in new forms of abuse, it will start as harmful but be lawful. It can still have tremendous effects on people offline, people of the LGBTQ+ community. It can be very racist, for instance, with memes, but it is very sure that the dominant theme is content, and it's a lot of the times it's lawful. It's allowed to post these things while we know that these people who are a victim need help. And I think by working that way in the public-private stakeholders working together in the public-private collaboration, you can pick up signals together. You can do triage, and from those signals you can see like, hey, maybe we see a trend online that really, as a society, we don't accept anymore. And then you might try, then you might start to change your legislation, because out of all those signals, you decide like, we want to change the law. It's something we did, for instance, in the Netherlands with doxing. To collect data to intimidate someone and also to spread that data with addresses, etc., has been criminalized since the 1st of January 2024. So I think by picking up these signals, by working integral on the content that's online, that is what we should do more. Like mentioned, I think we have a perfect example in the Netherlands, the ECP. They're here in the room, Marjolein and Dorijn. But I think how we did that in the Netherlands, that multi-stakeholder, public-private, working together and actually building something and looking at like, how should we approach this content, and be curious as company, be curious as education, also be curious as civil society and as, for instance, as ministries, that is much more the way forward, because a lot of the policies, legislation, in my opinion, is already there.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing also that best practice examples, and if colleagues are interested, we are also here in the IGF village with the Better Internet for Kids in the InSafe booth, and there's a lot more other best practices of such examples of the multi-stakeholder collaboration and connecting the different dots at national level if you are interested later on, and to continue the conversation with us. Before we will conclude this round, I would like to bring in 2 more colleagues, and also turn now to Kate for intervening with her points.
Yes, very quickly, because I'd like to get to questions as well. So I think on policy, I can think of 2 specific things that I would like to see happen. First, I'd like to see companies, and I've mentioned this already, but I'd like to see more transparency from companies regarding how they are identifying and removing child sexual exploitation and abuse. The first is we don't actually know the prevalence of this type of abuse on many platforms, because we do not have enough data from the platforms regarding how much they encounter. Second, it would be helpful to have transparency into the effectiveness of the tools that they are using. Right now, there are, generally speaking, I think 3 categories of tools being used to prevent, identify, and remove child sexual abuse material, and they are just kind of basically design-based features. So for example, in order to live stream, you need to have a certain number of followers or an account that has existed for a certain amount of time, or you need to go through an age assurance process to ensure that you are of a particular age in order to begin to live stream. It would be good to know the degree to which those types of tools are reducing the number of live streams or reducing the amount of problematic content shared. It would also be good to know the data on which content detection tools are trained. At this time, content detection tools like PhotoDNA, we know that those are trained on known CSAM, but they are specifically designed to identify particular images at rest. If we are talking about content in live streaming, content that is moving, content that is live, it would be helpful to understand, A, the data sets that are being used to train these types of tools, B, how the data is being sourced, whether it is being done ethically, and then C, whether there has been consent to the use of the training data, especially if it is being trained on existing child sexual abuse material. Currently, we are not aware, or at least we're not sufficiently aware of how these tools are being created and trained, and yet they are being marketed as tools to use to detect content in live streaming. And then, kind of the last thing we need to know is how well are signals detection tools or how well are they working? Tools that as the Tech Coalition talked about, tools like okay, we're looking at where your IP address is coming from. We're looking at signals regarding the content that is associated with the live stream, for example, to try to figure out the likelihood that child sexual abuse is happening within specific content or within a live stream. Data regarding how successful those are and how they are, and how mitigation and what mitigation efforts look like when content is misidentified as being CSAM, I think would be helpful things to engage in from a policy perspective. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is law enforcement. In the United States, one of the biggest problems we have is under-resourced law enforcement. So we are doing actually probably a relatively decent job of identifying CSAM, particularly when it is at rest, and reporting it into NCMEC. But what we don't know, or what is under-resourced, is the ability to address that identified harm by law enforcement. And another tool that is going to be necessary going forward, and is going to get more and more necessary, is the ability to separate out synthetic CSAM, AI-generated CSAM, from real, live CSAM that has been created using an actual child, because that is going to be essential to helping law enforcement identify children that are in harm, so that they can engage in enforcement efforts in a more efficient way.
Thank you for your points, and also for concluding a bit on the transparency aspect how holding companies more accountable. As Robert mentioned already, in the EU, we have the Digital Services Act that came into force recently with a specific article on the protection of minors. And here, this is also a good example where, for example, our colleagues from the Safer Internet Centers are very active, kind of transmitting this transparency in the education to the children, the young people, but also the parents and the schools to make policy making in general also accessible. One more intervention from our speakers for this final round, and we have Sabine on the screen. Last points from your side. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much. I think if you allow me to approach a question maybe a bit more from the legal angle, I think there are various areas of laws that still require strengthening, both on the international level but also national level. And I think there is a bit of a misconception that technology-facilitated child sexual abuse and exploitation is equally criminalized across the world, and we all have the same understanding what that means, and that's certainly not the case. So much more work needs to be done in ensuring strong national legislation, especially in areas such as live streaming. We have still a lot of countries that do not criminalize the mere accessing of child sexual abuse material as a separate criminal offense, and that's because the main focus of international law, for example, the optional protocol to the CRC, was always on possession, because that was the prevalent issue in the 90s when these conventions were drafted. So there's still quite a big of a push where upcoming issues such as live streaming need to be addressed in national criminal law. The same issue is with self-generated content. Self-generated content is often considered a homogeneous group of content, which we just also need to criminalize. However, that is a much more complex issue from a children's rights perspective, because there is content that is produced voluntarily, consensually, of adolescents above the age of consent to sexual activity, and these issues also need to be approached again with the same care from a children's rights lens within the context that this content is produced. I want to go back to one of the points I think that was mentioned a few times, which was a question around law enforcement. I would really like to see the same effort from governments that they at the moment put into platform regulation. They should put into law enforcement and strengthening the criminal justice framework, because there is a bit of I feel like an over-focus at the moment on the responsibility of platforms, while we know that if these cases then really reach the court system, most of them either A, fall through the cracks, or B, the children that are forced to go through the court system leave extremely traumatized. And this is for various reasons. First of all, because we still have a lack of protective measures for children in the criminal justice system. For example, protection from cross-examination. There is insufficient court preparation for children. And the presiding magistrate and also the prosecutor that interview and that examine children within the criminal justice system are not trained to do so in an age-appropriate and trauma-informed way. And I think this is a huge, huge gap. And I would really like to see an equal effort to re-strengthen that system. And the same applies, for example, especially for victims of technology-facilitated child sexual abuse and exploitation. A lot of measures that are typically used in a child-friendly justice process, for example, the use of CCTV cameras, can be quite traumatizing for a child that is a victim of live streaming of child sexual abuse and exploitation, because you put the child again in front of a camera in the criminal justice system, even though the camera has played a crucial role in the abuse and exploitation. Much more consideration needs to be paid around also the use of technology in the criminal justice sector and how that might impact children that have experienced technology-facilitated abuse and exploitation. My last point I want to make on the role of the financial sector, because I think that also came up quite a few times now, especially again in the context of live streaming of child sexual abuse and exploitation, where this is done in a commercial way. The financial sector can really play a very crucial role in flagging suspicious payments. I think mandatory reporting is really essential to make sure that financial institutions report suspicious transactions that might be linked to live streaming of child sexual abuse and exploitation. And one of the ways to do that is to consider these kind of offences, predicate offences, under anti-money laundering laws, and that really would help to oblige financial institutions to file suspicious transaction reports. And as we know, especially when it comes to organised crime, and that includes a lot of cases of live streaming of CSEA, follow the money is one of the most important leads for law enforcement, one of the most important starting points. So I think also when we talk about industry responsibility, let's not leave out the financial sector, especially in the context of commercial sexual exploitation and live streaming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sabina, also closing us up on a lot of action points and also very clearly mentioning that in all of this, we should not forget the well-being of the child, which is really needs to be and should be the center of the action. Thank you so much. For the last couple of minutes, we would like again to give the audience here in the room and online possibilities for interventions and questions. And please take the microphone and briefly introduce yourself.
So, my name is Gemerson Cruz. I live in Manaus. It's one of the biggest Brazilian cities, and it is located in the middle of the Amazon forest. And I have proudly represented the youth delegation of the Brazilian Internet Young Governors Training Program since 2022. And during the Internet Forum in Brazil, the largest IGF event in the world, I have proposed a workshop focused on the protection of children and adolescents in the online environment. While addressing issues such as sexual exploitation is crucial, we must also emphasize the growing need to educate and communicate people about the danger of overexposure online. This is a challenge that has intensified in recent years. Violence, discrimination, and sexualizing of minors have expanded beyond the physical and now permeate virtual space. The urgency to act is clear. We need platforms, regulations, public policies, education, and digital literacy to ensure that the internet is a safe space for all, especially for our youngest users. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and wonderful to have you here and many other youth from all over the world, especially the Global South, to participate in the IGF, and I think programs like the Youth IGF are crucial and important, and I think, as you rightly said, there is the need to put also more youth voices in the different sessions within the IGF and definitely also put more spotlight on children's rights. Thank you. We'll turn to our next speaker here in the room.
Hi, my name is Cosima, and I worked with the UK Safer Internet Centre for about 6 years, working on digital literacy and also policy. I think digital literacy is an incredibly powerful tool. I would just like to mention or get your insight, I know there's not lots of time, on how we can frame sort of literacy initiatives to be sensitive to the fact that if we want to teach young people to be safe online surrounding things like CSAM, but also framing it in a way that's sensitive to the fact that they are young, I think is really important so that they can understand it, but we're also not breaching a line. And then just quickly on policy, I really appreciated your insights on policy. I just wanted to quickly flag the idea that beyond the EU, several countries are either showing apprehension to sort of regulating AI or passing legislation that prevents its regulation at the moment. And I just wondered, with the rising role of AI in facilitating technology, facilitated like gender-based violence and also more specifically CSAM, how we can sort of navigate that, because if we're outlawing regulation of AI, then that also includes regulation of AI and CSAM. So yeah, just wanted to flag that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your participation as well. I don't know if any of our speakers here in the room or online would like to respond to a few points on the AI comment. Kate or Robert?
Sure. I mean, I'm not aware of every single policy effort around the world right now, but the US is currently considering a policy which would prevent US states from regulating AI to some extent. Our organization, the Center for Democracy and Technology, has identified this particular provision as incredibly problematic for a number of reasons. But the ways that it would interrupt states' ability to prevent harms such as the generation of non-consensual intimate images or synthetic CSAM, it is certainly one problem that might exist. One thing to think about, though, is whether existing laws actually already, without naming AI specifically, already cover that particular type of abuse. Hopefully there are around the world laws that currently exist that, while they might not say AI, nonetheless encompass the content that would be AI generated child sexual abuse material. Again, I don't know enough, but you know, from our perspective, preventing the regulation of AI whole cloth without considering the human rights impacts of that type of an action is deeply problematic.
Thank you. We have two last interventions and questions in the room, and then we will close with Danarai and some takeaways from the session. So maybe we can take both questions and then respond to it. Please go ahead.
Thanks. My name is Raul Plummer. I'm with the Electronic Frontier Finland. My first IGF was in João Pessoa. I've been to quite a few of these. And this is the first time I actually have to take a little space to comment. This is a very polarized issue as it is. It's very tough and complicated. I totally appreciate saying that privacy and children's rights can be completely aligned. And, but this kind of polarization.
Thank you. We will give the opportunity for follow-up after the session. Last speaker, please.
Yeah, I'm Juri Bokovi from the Finnish Green Party. My question is mostly relating to the issue that we have a lot of this. I mean, even this week we've heard a lot from these different actors, international actors, organizations, about the efforts to take down this type of content. But quite often the conversation ends up at washing their hands at, yeah, we took down this content, we don't have jurisdiction to go further. The investigation and other things need to be left up to law enforcement, which severely differs between different countries as well as legislation. And quite often the law enforcement does not have resources, neither in personnel or skills or understanding of current technologies to actually do anything about it. And thus we get those repeat offenders and recidivism on those platforms, as well as larger crime syndicates which operate through this or earn some part of their income through perpetuating this material or disseminating it. And it just seems still very confusing that this is such a long-lived issue, but there is no proper official body to unite these platforms and law enforcement. I hope to see some response on this topic.
Yes, thank you so much. I think we are all will continue trying our best to collaborate in the way that we have been doing here today. I think it's just taking a sort of glimpse of the conversation, opening up the conversation, and hopefully continuing the conversation in mutual respect of everyone's opinion and the work we're doing. We are up for time, but I would like to give a final minute to Danarai to kind of take us a little bit through some of the takeaways from our session.
Yes, thank you, Sabrina. We are at times, I'll be very brief, just to say that we are having this very important conversation, but I think it's obvious that we all recognize that this is a very serious problem that has significant, harmful, life-threatening impacts on children, their families, and communities. And so it's important to talk, to highlight many of the, as the speakers did, as well as the audience members highlight many of the important paths forward, particularly in terms of different kinds of recommendations, which included, for example, a point that was made at the very start, centering children in the design of solutions, in addressing the problem, starting from the design of technologies right through to the criminal justice system, centering their views as well as their well-being. Many participants, speakers mentioned the multi-stakeholder, the relevance and importance of multi-stakeholder approaches, but even more specifically talked about how that relates not just to, say, cross-platform approaches, public-private approaches, but also in standard setting and even coordination, improving coordination with law enforcement, for example. And we also talked about technical solutions and where these technical solutions where those developing policy require more information and transparency around these kinds of technologies. And so transparency is a theme that came up several times as well, both in the efficacy of technologies, but also in trying to disaggregate, for example, emerging problems around synthetic CSAM and actual CSAM and so on. I think there is a lot that was discussed, and I know given the line of participants that came up, we didn't even get to every point. We will be sharing a summary report of this afterwards as well. What I would like to end on, of course, is just to thank all of our speakers. We really appreciate everyone that was able to join from many different places, here on stage with Robert and Kate, but also online with Patricia, Io, Sabine, and Sean as well. And then thanks, of course, to Sabrina and Deborah, our co-organizers on this. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.